You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have some major breaking news here. An ICE officer has shot and killed a U.S. citizen who was attempting to flee the scene in Minneapolis during a protest against ICE. So I'm going to put about 15-20 seconds of the footage right here on the screen, a trigger warning for anybody who's watching it. This is obviously disturbing footage. I'm also going to take the sound away. So here is a quick clip of what happened in Minneapolis. Now, Glenn, that's one angle. There are obviously other angles that are floating around the internet right now, but I think all of them generally show roughly the same thing, which is that there is an ICE agent right at the corner of the vehicle, that the person in the vehicle was attempting to turn the wheel so that they could flee the scene, and of course the ICE agent used that as the opportunity to shoot and ultimately kill the person who was in the vehicle. So first and foremost, can I have your reaction to the footage that we just saw? And then I'm going to read some of the responses from the law enforcement agencies.
Brian, I've watched multiple camera angles, including a close-up, slow-motion version of that deadly shooting. And to this old prosecutor, it looked like criminal homicide, some level of homicide, whether second-degree murder or manslaughter. But I've tried to absorb as much information about the shooting as is out there presently, and let me let you read the statement that was issued by DHS, because I also saw Kristi Noem make a statement, and it was so infuriating and such pure propaganda that factors into my conclusion about what I'm seeing there.
So the statement by ICE, by Homeland Security, was as follows. I'm going to put this right here on the screen. Today, ICE officers in Minneapolis were conducting targeted operations when rioters began blocking ICE officers, and one of these violent rioters weaponized her vehicle, attempting to run over our law enforcement officers in an attempt to kill them, an act of domestic terrorism. An ICE officer, fearing for his life, the lives of his fellow law enforcement, and safety of the public, fired defensive shots. He used his training and saved his own life and that of his fellow officers. And of course, the statement goes on, but that is the crux of basically the narrative that Department of Homeland Security is sticking with right now.
That is pure propaganda based on what the video captured from multiple angles. So let me add to that what I heard Kristi Noem herself say. She said that our ICE agent's car got stuck in the snow and they were attempting to push it out of the snow when this, terrorist came up and tried to ram them with her car. Brian, when I heard that, I was so effing outraged because
Stop right there. This is where the propaganda becomes criminal. Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, went on television and said ICE agent's car was stuck in snow and they were pushing it when this terrorist tried to ram them. That is an outright fabrication. We have video from multiple angles. The ICE vehicle is not stuck. There are no agents pushing a car. What we see is a woman, Renee Good, a 37-year-old American citizen, mother of 3, slowly backing her car up to get out of the way. She's not ramming anyone. She's not attacking. She's literally trying to leave. The video shows her reversing, turning her wheel away from the officers, and attempting to drive around the ICE vehicle. And as she's driving away, an ICE agent opens fire and kills her. Kristi Noem didn't accidentally get the facts wrong. She invented a completely false narrative to justify an execution. She called an American mother a terrorist to cover up what Glenn just said looks like criminal homicide, either second-degree murder or manslaughter. This is what state propaganda looks like. A cabinet secretary fabricating a story about a car stuck in snow that never happened, calling a murdered woman a terrorist, all to protect a federal agent who shot an unarmed fleeing civilian. Orwellian doesn't begin to cover it.
Let's break it down, and then let's talk about the law that applies to a police-involved shooting, something that I was, involved in as a career homicide prosecutor multiple times, trying to assess whether what we see was a legitimate exercise of police force, whether it was excessive but perhaps understandable, or whether it was flat out criminal. So what Kristi Noem said is so contradicted by the video, because what we see, one camera angle that you just displayed, there is a woman. Now, you can't see that she's a woman, but reportedly the person killed was a woman driving this vehicle. is actually trying to back up to get out of the way.
Yeah, and
of
by
an
the way,
ICE vehicle.
I'm gonna put that right on the screen as you talk here, so people can see the vehicle backing up, turning the wheels, and then driving away. Go on.
I mean, this is such a direct refutation of what Kristi Noem said. It appears that there is I think a white ICE vehicle, identified as an ICE vehicle, stopped in the street. You see this woman slowly backing her car up to get out of the way of the ICE vehicle so she can go around it and be on her way. And as she is, after she is backing up, she obviously puts it in drive. She begins to move forward. She turns her wheel away from the officers who are kind of to the front left of her vehicle, and she tries to go around the ICE vehicle. And one of the officers opens fire on what I believe is an unarmed woman who I don't believe is wanted. I haven't heard that there was an arrest warrant for her. She was a known, dangerous person. And they kill her. That, to this old prosecutor, looks like an actionable criminal homicide. I use the word homicide because it could be, for example, a second-degree murder. It could be a lower level of homicide, criminal homicide, a manslaughter. But, that to me does not look like a justified use of deadly force. When does an officer get to engage in deadly force? Brian, it's actually not that different from when you or I would be lawfully entitled to exercise self-defense, including lethal force. If an officer is at imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury as a result of being confronted by these circumstances, the officer can engage in force, but only that amount of force necessary to repel the attack. But if you are about to be killed, let me break it down from legalese into English. If you're about to be killed, you can exercise lethal force to defend your life. If somebody else is about to be killed, a police officer can exercise deadly force to protect that third person's life. But you know what you can't do, Brian? You can't shoot at a car that is trying to drive around a vehicle that is not posing an imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury to anybody based on what I'm seeing from those multiple camera angles. So assuming that this is criminal conduct, and it sure looks like criminal conduct to me, the next question is, what will be done about it, if anything, by either federal law enforcement authorities or state law enforcement authorities?
And I want to jump into that in just a moment, but I have to read one more statement and get your reaction to this. This is Trump's response to the footage. He said, quote, "I have just viewed the clip of the event which took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a horrible thing to watch. The woman screaming was obviously a professional agitator, and the woman driving the car was very disorderly, obstructing and resisting, who then violently, willfully, and viciously ran over the ICE officer who seemed to have shot her in self-defense. Based on the attached clip, it is hard to believe he is alive, but he is now recovering in the hospital. The situation is being studied in its entirety, but the reason these incidents are happening is because the radical left is threatening, assaulting, and targeting our law enforcement officers and ICE agents on a daily basis. They're just trying to do the job of making America safe. We need to stand by and protect our law enforcement officers from this radical left movement of violence and hate." So a slew of outright lies. This idea that the woman was violently running over the ICE officer. Hard to believe he's alive. To be clear, the ICE officer in the aftermath of this footage actually ran over to the car to see the woman who he had just shot and killed. So this notion that he was bloodied on the floor and couldn't even stand up because he'd been so viciously run over by this woman is so outside the realm of reality.
Based on the camera angles I saw,
let's be absolutely clear about what Trump just did. He looked at video evidence of an ICE agent killing an American citizen, and he lied. Repeatedly, brazenly. Trump said the woman violently, willfully, and viciously ran over the ICE officer. That's a lie. The video shows the officer stepping out of the way. Glenn, a career homicide prosecutor, said explicitly, "I did not discern that the officer was struck by the vehicle." Trump said it's hard to believe he is alive, and that the officer is recovering in the hospital. That's a lie. After the shooting, the ICE agent immediately ran over to the car to look at the woman he had just killed. If he'd been run over and was bloodied on the ground, he wouldn't be sprinting to the vehicle. Trump called the murdered woman a professional agitator who was disorderly, obstructing, and resisting. That's a lie. Her name was Renee Good. She was a 37-year-old poet, a mother of 3 children. She had no arrest warrant. She wasn't wanted for anything. She was an American citizen trying to drive away from a protest. And here's the most insidious part. Trump is doing this to pre-poison the jury pool. He knows this might go to trial, so he's flooding the zone with lies now, so that when an ICE agent is charged with homicide, millions of Americans will already believe a false narrative. This is what authoritarian leaders do. They lie about state violence. They call victims terrorists. They lionize killers as heroes. And Trump just gave that ICE agent a green light to know he'll be protected, pardoned, and celebrated no matter what the law says.
The officer stepped out of the way. I did not discern that the officer was struck by the vehicle.
No, not at all.
And the officer, as the vehicle was moving away from him, unloaded and killed the woman who's in the car. Mind you, Brian, you can't shoot at a fleeing vehicle to try to stop the driver from getting away. You know, think about this, and you may have movie references. When a bad guy, right, a known bad guy, just robbed the bank, just killed an old lady, is barreling down the street, police officers don't line up, and just start shooting at the car as it's going by. We throw down rumble strips or we try to box it in. Why? Because you can't shoot at a fleeing vehicle, or you can't shoot at somebody running away on foot either if that person is not posing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury to you or another member of the community. So all of this is not, look, listen, Donald Trump does nothing but spew propaganda into the public square, just as he did in his run-up to being tried for his crimes in state court in New York. Once you move into a court proper, none of this is evidence. None of it would be admissible. It's all a bunch of propaganda, lies, and bullshit. And Donald Trump was convicted in a New York Minute on the evidence. Now, what will happen here, in my estimation, is, you have the possibility of a federal prosecution, a federal criminal investigation, and if the evidence warrants it, a federal prosecution, and a state investigation and potential prosecution. Now, I don't think any of us are foolish enough to believe that Kash Patel's FBI will conduct a legitimate, full, fair investigation of this incident, and if the evidence supports a federal indictment, that Pam Bondi's DOJ will indict this ICE officer. We know that's not going to happen. Of course, if it did happen, Donald Trump would simply pardon him, because in Donald Trump's book, he's already a hero based on that bullshit statement that Trump issued. But the state, if the state authorities believe that their local laws, their state homicide, murder, manslaughter laws were violated, and it looks to my eye, I haven't seen all of the evidence, but based on the camera angles I saw, this looks like unjustified excessive force resulting in death, then the officer should be charged in state court. Let me talk through what happens in the event there are state charges brought. That officer, because he's a federal officer who will claim, I should enjoy qualified immunity against prosecution because I was a federal officer engaged in the official duties of my office, that officer will try to have the case transferred or removed from state court to federal court. Again, just like Donald Trump did with his state prosecution in Manhattan. Alvin Bragg's district attorney's office was prosecuting him for state crimes. He tried to take his case and get it transferred to federal court, and Judge Alvin Hellerstein said, oh, heck no, you're going to remain being prosecuted in state court because you have no viable claim that what you were doing by paying off a porn star and then hiding what you were doing with these payments was some kind of a presidential duty. So we have to try this in federal court. So, but the ICE agent will undoubtedly, if he is indicted in state court, try to get his case transferred to federal court. And then it's an open question as to whether the judge would grant that motion and it would become a state court prosecution that would be tried in federal court, and it would give that officer the opportunity to make a full, robust claim of qualified immunity and try to convince the federal court judge, I was acting within the scope of my official duties when I shot the woman under the circumstances that we see in the video. I don't think that's going to fly.
Is there a better likelihood of qualified immunity working in federal court as opposed to state court, as opposed to keeping this thing in state court and allowing the prosecution to go that way?
Here's the nightmare scenario we're facing, and Glenn is about to walk through the legal mechanics of it. But let me spell out the political reality first. Glenn already said he doesn't believe Kash Patel's FBI will conduct a legitimate investigation. He doesn't believe Pam Bondi's DOJ will indict this ICE officer. And even if by some miracle they did, Trump already called this agent a hero who acted in self-defense. That means a pardon is guaranteed. So the only path to justice is state prosecution. Minnesota needs to charge this ICE agent with criminal homicide, either second-degree murder or manslaughter, as Glenn assessed. But here's where it gets complicated. The agent will claim qualified immunity because he's a federal officer. He'll try to move the case from state court to federal court, just like Trump tried to do with his Manhattan case. And if a federal judge allows that transfer, we're in murky territory. Glenn is about to explain that even in federal court, it would still be a state prosecution with state prosecutors. Trump couldn't pardon state crimes, but the problem is the judge. Will a Trump-appointed federal judge give this ICE agent the benefit of every doubt on qualified immunity? Will they dismiss the charges before it ever gets to a jury? This is why state prosecutors need to fight like hell to keep this in state court, because the moment it moves to federal court, even if it's technically still a state case, the odds of justice tilt in favor of the killer. And an American mother, Renee Good, will have been executed by her own government with no accountability.
You know, first of all, it is kind of judge-specific. I have trust and confidence in the federal trial court bench generally, and in the federal courts of appeal. I've lost my faith and confidence and respect, in the Supreme Court, unfortunately, given some of the rulings that they have handed down in Donald Trump's favor that undercut the express text of the Constitution. But so what it does, though, is when you're in state court litigating questions of qualified immunity, that's not like the stock and trade of state court judges or state court systems, because they don't often try federal employees or federal officers. That's why, the federal courts are a little bit better equipped. Why? Because they have an entire body of case law, of precedent available to them on the question of qualified immunity as it is applied to federal officers. But I don't think that will necessarily give the defendant a better chance of winning the qualified immunity motion and getting his charges dismissed. So, but it's a bit dependent on who the judges are. But as I say, and I will always say, I generally have faith, trust, and confidence in the federal judiciary.
And finally, let's talk about pardons for a moment. If this moves from the state court system to the federal court system, it's not like it would leave the state itself. It's just in federal court in that state. And so how would Trump's ability to issue a pardon apply here?
So yeah, this is a little counterintuitive, because once a case is in federal court, you think, oh, it's a federal case. No, if the federal prosecutors decline to bring charges against this person, and that's what I suspect will happen, once the state court prosecutors decide to indict him, if they present the evidence to a grand jury, the grand jury decides there's enough to indict. If that case is successfully transferred to federal court, guess what? It's still a state court prosecution. It's not like it magically morphs into a federal prosecution. No, you don't bring federal prosecutors in to handle it. There are not indictments of federal crimes. It is still the state court prosecutors proceeding on the state court crimes that were indicted by the state grand jury. They just happen to be tried in federal court. This is not unprecedented. It's unusual. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And, if it does happen and this person ultimately is tried on those charges in federal court, well, then the victim will have her day. Her family, because she didn't survive the incident, will have their day in court, and hopefully justice will be done based on the evidence and the law.